As a young child, my fondest memories of Dad was when we would go to Green Gully. All the school holidays would go down and ride horses, as you remember, Michael, and staying down at the farm with Bert and Norma. And my memories of Dad were he was very strong and such a wonderful horseman and had such compassion and love for horses. Yeah, there was beautiful memories that time of my life, and really the best childhood memories I've got are of Green Gully and being down there. As we go on, going to New South Head Road to Mayer Handicrafts, every Saturday would go there, or my sister and I, Jenny, and Dad would always be working hard, making sandals and bags and belts. And I just remember him always working and creating and just loving what he did. And the place was so rough. And I still remember the room, his bedroom, and it was, I don't know if anyone's been there or not. Did you go down there? Yeah. It was like no window, it was dark, there was just a simple bed, and he had a picture of Baba, and that was it. And it was so austere. It was quite interesting, really, that memory of my father living in that room, and that shop was, yeah, I have a lot of memories of that. And then as I got older and he moved up here, obviously he didn't work in the shop anymore. But I would come up here, and I remember meeting Bernard and Joanne for the first time. I think I was about 11, and staying here, and that was really special. I remember that, coming to Barbara's room for the first time and to Avatar's abode. So then really my memories changed when Dad had his stroke when I was 17, and obviously our communication changed. But before he had his stroke, only 2 months before he had his stroke, we went to India. He took me to India for the first time. And for many years he asked me to come to India, but I didn't want to come. So finally I did, and we went, and it was just wonderful. It was so wonderful. It was my first real experience of knowing Dad's spirituality. And it was a time I'll never forget. And he saw me bow down, and I remember him mentioning that. And then not long after we came back, he had his stroke, so things changed. But I would come regularly, as everyone knows, to come and visit him and spend time with him. And that was really beautiful, just to sit with him and be in the cabin with him, in Francis's cabin. And he would repeat things. Because of his speech, I suppose it wasn't as fluent. But there were some things he would repeat time and time again. And even as a little girl, he said that one time, it was either at Mayer House, I think it was, or up here at Avatar's abode when Barbara was here. Barbara called for Reg to come and sit with him. And he asked Reg, had he any questions? And Reg said no. And Barbara said, good. This is how Reg was, good. Then they sat in silence, and Dad said the love and silence was, no words, dear. So I think Roy might have mentioned that as well, that was one of his moments with Barbara. And he used to say often, I have no words, dear, but I know he's God. I know he's God. And he'd just have this look in his eye, looking out of just, he was there with him on some level. You know, his love was amazing. And also, Barbara said when he came to Australia, and it's written in Dad's letter, that Barbara said that Reg knew him when he was Jesus, and that he would talk and talk. So, and Dad would say, I don't know, but that's what Barbara said, that he was with him when he was Jesus. Another thing he used to tell, obviously these were very fond memories, was at when they were building Mayer House. And I think there was some type of either makeshift, you'd know this, makeshift, either a tent or some type of makeshift cabin while they were building. But Dad used to say that they would meet it in the evening, and Francis would read books, And obviously it was all about Barbara at that point, but he said that there was nothing. They were just all on the floor, and he said, but it was rough as anything, but he said he was just so happy. He said it was just wonderful, those early days. Yeah. So I feel very honoured to have him as my dad, and obviously, you know, it's had a big impact on my life, and we were very close. He was a very loyal father to both Leonie and I, very loving and very loyal. He used to say, well, I was pretty wayward teenager, and I think his parenting came very much through just do your best. He didn't have any high expectations or put pressure on me. He just kept saying, just do your best. And he also used to say, was almost like a warning in some type. He would say, I'm going to die soon, maybe because he was so much older when he had me. I will die soon, and then I'll come back again, and then I'll come back again, and then I'll come back again until I'm perfect, you know. So he used to say those little things when I was young. Yeah. Which was really sweet. Yeah, very sweet. Yeah, it was actually the room next to the Samadhi. Yeah. He saw me bow down to the stretcher there. Wow, being around the mandali, yeah, he just glowed, absolutely glowed. And every time I've been to India, because I only went there once with Dad, and but every time I've been to India, Erich would always, Helen, Helen, Helen. Then he'd grab me and put his hands on my face and say, Reg, 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 your father, you know, and he had such love and admiration for Reg, yeah. That was very special. Nothing specifically, but there was definitely a lot of admiration and love. Yes, yes. And Dad towards Erich and the mandali as well, you know, just such love and admiration. My relationship with Barbara is there, definitely. As a young girl, I remember wondering if Dad loved Barbara more than me, I was very young. And I remember I used to console myself, of course he loves me more than Barbara. But this was when I was like 8 or 9 or 10. But when we went to India and I had my own experience of Barbara, that all changed. It's something beyond human love. And my relationship with Barbara is private in many ways. But I think of Barbara all the time, and I've got pictures all around my house, and I've got a Barbara room with Dad's special things. And yeah, so it's a connection. Well, his photos of Barbara, some Barbara hair, things that he made, like his wallet and what else? Oh, and some small beads, I don't know where, some dooney dust as well, which I suspect was from the early days. And pictures, yeah, just, and the garland. There's a garland, but I don't have that out because I'm worried it will perish. But I opened it up yesterday when I was going through Dad's things, and it has a slight musty smell, but I got a real feeling of Barbara. It was because I've been praying, give me strength, you know, what do I say and everything, but I had such a feeling of Barbara. And I think it was from the East-West gathering, this garland. And in the letter, or the writing that he wrote there, he was talking about when Barbara left, how he and Francis were disappointed initially that the table where the flowers go wasn't finished. Yeah. And he was saying the wood's not very good, and it was just a pineapple crate, I think it is. Yeah, and then they both decided, no, Barbara saw that, and he stayed in this room, and that has to stay. And he used to tell me that as well. When I, you know, often anyway. They've lasted. Horses, definitely horses. And he just loved being on the land. And he used to say that if it wasn't for Barbara, he would have loved to had lived in Migalong Valley down in Green Gully, where his old friends Bert and Norma lived. He just loved mustering cattle and being on the land and milking cows as well. Apparently they had some cows here as well that he used to get up early in the morning and milk. So he loved the land, and he loved creating with his hands, leather work, and being of service. Everything was, you know, about doing something all the time, being active, being active. And even after he had his stroke, you know, he learned how to write again and talk again, and he'd write and write and write to really try his best to be independent and be useful. As he said, it's important to be useful. And the stroke happened on the right side, so he had to learn with the left hand. Yes. He did very well. He did very well. And I think that was written not long before he actually moved to the nursing home, because I remember him sitting there and writing it over a period of visits that I would have. So it took him quite a long time. I did do the mowing a couple of times. Yeah, the push mower. He wouldn't let me use the ride-on.
Okay. You don't remember him doing other jobs?
I don't think so. After the stroke, it was pretty well just the mowing. Yeah. And he used it as a way to get around as well. So it was kind of a double handiness. I used to repair some of his shirts that were just so frayed. But yes, no, he didn't want to throw them out. So I would patch them around the collar and things. So he didn't want to throw anything out. He didn't want to waste anything. And yes. He lived very simply. And I remember when Dad was in the nursing home, because he was in it not even quite a year before he passed away. I think it was about 10 months. When I'd come up to visit him, and he never had a room of his own, it was always shared with 2 others. And he'd always have his barber videos going, and just that special feeling. You'd walk in to the room and you still had that feeling of barber, and he'd just be laying on his bed watching, you know, barber videos, and so that presence was still around him even though he wasn't here. And we used to bring him up here as well, and until that got too much. And I still remember the last time I brought him up from the nursing home, and he had the frame, and we would go in together, and then I would sit in the chair on the corner, and he would come in and I'd help him, and he'd just stand there, and he couldn't bow, so he'd just kiss Barbara's sandals and just stand there, and it was beautiful. And then we'd go over to the meeting hall and make a cup of tea and just sit for a bit longer before I took him back to the nursing home. The whole community is just wonderful. The way they helped him stay here, it wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for the community. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I was 17, and I remember when he did have his stroke, I quit my job nursing, and it was like I was going to look after my dad. I was not going to let him go into a nursing home. Well, you know, obviously I was very passionate about it, but if it wasn't for all these wonderful people, he would have ended up. So no, it was obviously Barbara's will to have that love and support that he had. As Roz mentioned, I think it was Roz mentioned at the Sahavas about all the plastic chairs, you know, up the road, and I can still see him with his stick, you know, walking. And we used to walk down to East Farm together. I remember that too, but that was obviously not long after he had his stroke. Yeah, we used to walk down, and I remember bumping into, I think it was Janice Stevens, going down towards East Farm, and we used to walk all the way around together.
Helen Talkins reminded me of a few more stories with Reg, the shop at Edgecliff.
Yes.
Where he did leather work, and one delightful thing I remember is Reg, we were talking about customers, and he made the point that over the years, so many of his customers were return customers, and from ships where different ones would buy leather work, go back to be back in their home country, and people say, well, I want some of that, and so they, on the next trip to Australia, get Reg to do it. This building, the landlord was one of the wealthy churches, but they would not even provide water for the cistern of the toilet. The toilet was connected, but not the water supplied to the cistern. He had to do that by bucket. Mm. Do you remember that?
I do, and I remember there wasn't a shower either. We had to have buckets for washing, yeah.
A couple of mower stories. You mentioned mowing. because he was down his right side, he lost strength. The thing to get a mower where the pedals were only on the left-hand side, because he could only use his left foot, and it was a snapper mower, I think, David, which fulfilled that criteria, whether he could use his left leg for the brake. When he was in France's cabin, no longer able to use the ride-on, I don't know who banned him from that. I doubt if he did it by himself. But he would, with a push mower, motorised, he'd get me to start it, and he'd, with his walking stick, and stand in one place and do this, and then move and walking stick and do this with the mower. And we were trying to discourage him from doing it, and he did not want to stop mowing. And the last time he mowed, he gave it up of his own accord, mowing, leaning on this push mower. I had a chair about here and another chair 20 feet away, and I'd stand behind him in case he fell, and he'd go up to the other chair and sit down. I'd turn the mower around and then back, and he'd sit in the chair again, and I'd turn the mower around until he of his own accord said, "That's it." Like, I'm not sure what words he used, but he made it clear he's now going to give up mowing. But he had some beautiful mannerisms with his speech, and we learnt over the years to decipher it. Like with the mowing, he'd often talk, I think he'd call it the hard stuff. Would you help me with the hard stuff? And these are rocks in the ground interfering with the mower. It mightn't have been hard stuff, but and other times he'd come over and knock on the door or call out, and bright-eyed say, "White stuff?" And this was him asking, would I come and massage his neck and back with this white cream, but that was the white stuff, that was the cue. So he had some delightful turns of phrase, but were able to communicate.
Yeah.
I was trying to remember the names he had for people, because he couldn't remember their name, but he had ways of describing people. Can you remember any of those, anyone?
I remember particularly like with Roy and Roz and Robert, the R's. So he'd go through the alphabet.
Oh, yes.
Remember? Yeah? Like A, B, Bernard. Yeah, so that's how he would remember. Yes, but he did have some funny, interesting names to describe people. Yeah.
We always knew who he meant.
Yes. Oh, you know, things like the strong one and, you know, the big one or something, you know, or the tall one. Yeah, just little memories coming back of things, and yeah, just his little idiosyncrasies that were so endearing, and the way he would talk, and the little glint in his eye and his smile, you know. And he could be not happy about something, and everything showed very clearly on Dad's face. Maybe it was the stroke, I don't know. But if he wasn't happy or he was concentrating, he had this intense look. But then if something made him happy, you know, his face just would light up, you know. It was lovely, yes. But he often used to get this far away look on his face and in his eyes, and he'd just sit there and look, and I knew he was thinking of Baba. Yeah. So this is something that Dad wrote over a period of time, and as the English is a bit tricky, it starts off very fluent. I'll do my best to try and make it a bit more understandable.
So this was written with his left hand?
With his left hand.
In the last months of his life?
I think in the last couple of years.
Okay.
Yeah. So he writes here, "First I met Francis Brabazon at Sydney, 1950, and Francis and I studied books, but we did not hear about Baba." I think what he meant there was Sufism. "Later we heard about Baba, say 1952, and Francis immediately went to a ship and arrived in America. Francis met Baba, and he is God. Truth and love. Later I met Bill LePage, roughly 1954 in Sydney. Then Francis and Bill went to India to see Baba. My wife and I and Leonie did not have sufficient money, but at the same time, is he God? In 1956 in Sydney, I finally met Baba. He is so beautiful. That's when I'm going to cry. Truth and love. He is God. From that moment, I worked and worked as much as possible for love. Then I talked about Baba and books, etc. Francis searched for land, large and suitable for Baba. He eventually found the land suitable for Baba. In fact, lovely. It is called Baba's House, Queensland, February 1958. Francis immediately telephoned to Bill and Reg to come straight away to work for Baba's House. So I said goodbye, Bill and Sydney, and off I go on a train. It took 2 days and I arrived at Woombye, Queensland and met Francis again. It was good to see Francis, and we arrived in a taxi and then walked and finally arrived and sat down with Roy Balch and his wife with 8 kids. I was so happy to see Roy and his wife and kids. Roy was a most capable worker and his wife cooked very well. So Francis, me and Roy's family had dinner. Incidentally, at night time, there was no sleeping blankets, nothing, empty, and yet we were happy. Nothing. We slept on the floor permanently. Francis, Roy and me started to work and hopefully start the Baba House. Every day we worked. Then in the morning at 6 o'clock, I milked 3 cows. It was vital. I milked them again at 5 p.m. Then Saturday, Bill arrived at Brisbane and worked at the Army. Then Bill and I sat down on a train and eventually went out to see Francis and friends. We worked and enjoyed ourselves. The next day we returned to Sydney. But on Saturday again, Bill came to Woombye and hopefully Baba's House and see old friends. Then Lorna, with a baby, left for Sydney on a train and arrived in Woombye, Queensland. It took 2 days and March was hot and sticky. Lorna and baby climbed down and met Francis again. Lorna was shocked about the floor and she cried and cried. Francis cheered her up, and the next day Lorna, with the baby, was happy. Lorna cooked and we sat down on the floor and the baby was with me, so Lorna was free to cook. Then Francis gradually left it to Roy and Reg. Roy was a skilled man and Reg was handy, particularly with wood. I loved it. Francis had a machine, large, and he was very busy. The house was high and Francis and Reg climbed up to sit down. The table, which I think that is in Baba's room, the table was rough and long. The wood was strong and long, and underneath 2 lumps of iron. This is when I think he's talking actually about moving the house. The earth was clear. Baba's house was improved and Roy and Reg worked steadily. The old house was very close to Baba's house. They had to prepare the house and shifted it a long way. So he talks about shifting the house on the truck and how wet it was, the wettest he'd ever remembered, which didn't make it easy. Okay, the rain and dampness was the wettest time I can remember, 1958. Francis is not a skilled man, say with wood, but with poultry. Then he changes it, saying it's himself. During May, Robert arrived and worked with Francis. Lorna and baby was happy to see them again. Roy and I worked at the meeting hall, but it's not finished. The iron was finished and concrete also. Roy and I built it up and hoisted it up the Baba flag pole. I built it up at the 3 tents for sleeping. Bernard helped me. He was a young man. Women stayed in the old house. Bill has a car ready to drive. 1958, June the 3rd. That day, Barbara with Erich arrived in Brisbane, and Bill was so happy to see Barbara and also Francis. It took 2 hours to arrive. When Barbara arrived, we carried him up on the chair, and Barbara was most comfortable. Francis signalled to me, and I ran as quick as possible, and I met Barbara again. Barbara was happy, and I was happy to see Barbara again. Barbara with Erich talked and talked, but the meeting hall was not finished. The next day, Barbara talked of Erich, and the men came over for a time. Suddenly, Barbara called, "Reginald," and I ran as quick as possible. Then Barbara talked, and I talked, and suddenly Barbara turned as Erich listened. We, Reg, had met and talked in Jesus' time. The next day, the men and the woman stood up at Barbara's house, and Barbara arrived with Erich. Again, Barbara talked and said that Francis is the only one at the old house for the time being. And Robert immediately asked Barbara if Lorna and Robert could stay permanently also. Barbara was doubtful. Then he said yes. Immediately, John asked Barbara and family, could we also stay at a new home? Barbara immediately said yes. Barbara said that Bill is in charge. I know he is young, but he is in charge. Then Barbara walked outside, and then sitting down, Barbara was so sad. His mind was thinking 1,000,000 miles away. The men and women watched Barbara, and all of us were silent. Then suddenly Barbara was awake. They decided to drive to the old house with Francis and Bill. He saw it and he was most happy. Barbara checked all the tents with Erich. He was happy with the tents. Barbara was also very happy with the Barber house, and also throwing small things and catching it by young men. I suppose that was the game that he would play. Barbara was very happy and enjoying himself. The next day, Barbara decided to return home to India. Bill in his car got ready, and Barbara with Erich and they were comfortable. Off they went, shouting, "Jai Baba, Jai Baba." Then Francis and I came to the Barber house to discuss the wood on quality. It is the very best wood, except for one very poor. It is a cheap one, temporary, throw it out. We intended to throw it out, but suddenly we saw Barbara and said no. This particular one was poor, but Barbara saw it all, so Francis and I left it. Brings back memories. I had to go back to work to Sydney and said to Francis and all, "Jai Barbara." At Sydney, I worked at a hotel. So Bill arrived and we talked about Barber books and Barber's place. We had to work, but some days I was free on Saturday or occasionally Monday for Barber books. This happened a lot. One particular place I met a man regarding Barber's books, and we talked about Barber books, and he said, yes, we will buy 100 of those books, but cheap. We agreed, and I was happy. Then came Francis and stayed at Bill's place, and also Reg at Sydney. Then came a letter with Francis that Barbara said, come for a while at Barbara's house. He was delighted. Francis said goodbye, thinking that he would enjoy with Barbara and return back home. I was wrong. Later I heard about Francis that Barbara would come again and meet us all again, and I was delighted. I hope that helped. It's a bit tricky in parts, the writing, but he used to say it was the happiest times. I mean, he obviously had many happy times in his life where his heart was, just opened, and riding horses, being down with Bert and Norma, that was a great love. He loved it so much, and he used to take Barber books to them as well, but they weren't really that interested, and he knew that, but still that great love. Yes, he loved going to India, absolutely. Even after Barber dropped the body, going with Roy and Roz all those years, he loved it, absolutely. And he loved the Mandali very much too. And I was reading letters between, the Mandali and Dad also, even after the stroke. It was beautiful, absolutely. I loved horses. I had the same, similar love to horses, absolutely. But I fell off a lot. I was only thinking that the other day, I don't ever remember Dad falling off a horse, but I think I fell off about a dozen times. But we'd go down to the Cox's River, and that were lovely memories.
How old would you have been?
I started going down there when I was 4, and up until I think I was probably about 11, I think 10 or 11, when I think Dad moved up here. It was in the, I can't remember exactly when, but yeah, they were lovely. And we'd stay in old Mrs. Carlon's house, which was all mud brick. And the wallpaper in our room, it was called the girls' room, was all newspaper cuttings. Do you remember that?
I do, very well.
That's now a historic site. Yeah, National Parks bought that, and I don't know what they're doing with it, but it was so rough, but it was wonderful. Oh yeah, and going gymkhanas and yeah, that was wonderful. Yeah.
And Leonie, your older half-sister, was also accomplished.
She was very good, yeah. I think she was more into dressage though, because she was in the Royal Easter Show. But when Dad moved up here and he had Shams, the horse Shams, and then he bought this Arabian horse, Salarif, which we called Riffy. Remember the grey horse? And I used to ride it.
Photo, but I don't remember it.
Okay, yeah, I used to ride it. Well, I was the only one that rode it. And that's when I lived up here. So I would ride him at least once a week because they need exercise. And Dad would watch me, particularly coming up to Trig Point, and I'd canter, if I had these long stretches, and Dad's face, he just loved it. Or I'd come up to the cabin and he'd be there waiting with a carrot, and it gave him a lot of joy to see me on the horse. And I know he was sad that he couldn't ride anymore, but still, he had that lovely relationship. He said, I can do any mortal thing with it, I can crawl in between its legs. Not that he did, but he had such trust and love of his horses, and the bellowing. Remember the bellowing? Come on, dear. And they'd come running down where the dam is and the old shed. I think that was the first horse, wasn't it? I think it was. And they had a donkey as well that used to cry out a lot in the early mornings and things, yeah.
So he never rode after his stroke?
No.
I didn't know that.
No, he wanted to, but it was too dangerous, obviously. Yeah. Oh, he had a wonderful relationship with animals, yeah. And also children. I remember as a young girl when we'd go down to Green Gully in Froggy, the old ute, he would wave in the car to kids in front. I just remember, being embarrassed. But he was always so friendly to everyone, really. I think that he also made bags for the Mundaley, because I was reading in letters a while ago, bags and things that either someone else would deliver or he would deliver. Yeah, I've still got the bags. And I remember, I don't know if Dad said it or someone else did, but his leather work was made so well and so strong, it was like to last 700 years, like his woodwork, everything had to be just so. But my mum has come here and she had an experience of Baba, just saying, I just felt the love in Baba's room, and I always remembered that. And I think there was a picture she saw of Baba and said, oh, I could have that in my room. And I remembered, because then when I went to India on one of my trips, I bought a little one and I gave it to her. Yeah, but there's respect. And then he had the stroke within weeks. So when he was in India, he had thrombosis, but it was undiagnosed. So he had a sore on his leg, like inside, it was red, and so then when we came back, I remember getting a call, I think it was from Bill, that he'd had a heart attack. He thought it was indigestion, but it was an actual heart attack. And so I came up, and I'm sure Leonie did as well. And I remember walking into the Nambour hospital, and he was sitting up in bed, and, he looked fine. And he said, I knew it wasn't my time. And so then we went back to Sydney, and within weeks he had that massive stroke. So it was such a Baba gift, really, to go before he had the stroke. But I used to massage him every week when I worked at Mayo Clinic for a few years. And he'd come down and have a treatment, an acupuncture treatment, and I'd always massage him. And I used to massage him also on his bed because he used to get a bit of lower back pain. He loved sweets. He loved fruit bread and jam and spicy fruit rolls, you know, the little biscuit things. His diet was not fabulous at all. I remember Sim saying he'd just eat this, I don't know, it was like some type of Devon. So he had very basic. And I remember when we were in the shop, there was a possum that would come in the kitchen. I don't know if you remember, but the door in the kitchen going outside was like a barn door. So the top opened and the bottom part didn't. And a possum would come every night and he'd give it fruit bread. So that was his friend. Yeah. But he used to cook up chops in lots of butter and boil vegetables till they were falling apart, put lots of butter and salt and, hamburgers. I mean, when we would go down to Green Gully, we'd always get a hamburger and a big block of caramello chocolate. He loved caramello chocolate, and he was a parent that didn't mind if I ate the whole thing, which was wonderful. But no, he loved his sweets, definitely. It would have been special for Dad too to take his, barber friends down there and share some of that. All I remember is him saying that that Francis would read books that I suspect were from the Baron, and then when Francis went to America and came back, then those books left. But consequently, when I was living in the Blue Mountains when Dad passed away, and I was living in the same suburb as Bert Sheards. Yes. Who also met Barbara, and he was the one who introduced Reg to Sufism. This is my understanding. I'm pretty sure that's right. So Bert and I met him once when Dad was still alive. My mum knew him as well from the Hotel Australia. And so consequently, when Dad passed away, I was living in the same suburb. And so every week I would walk to Bert and Vera, because his wife was Vera, and I'd massage his legs. And he was a beautiful old man. He was so cheeky and had a wicked sense of humour. And he had a lot of love and revere for Dad. Yeah. But my memory of when Bert, because we would talk all the time about Reg, and he brought out old photos and my memory is Bert was hitchhiking and he was picked up by someone involved with Sufism, whether it was the Baron or it was someone else, and they were on their way to a meeting. Now, whether or not Bert went at that time or not, but that's my understanding and how Bert was introduced to Sufism, and then Dad came along, and then Francis was, I could be off there, but there's definitely some truth in that. Passed away in 2005, in about August. Yeah, and interesting, he passed away on, I heard about Bert passing, I think it was either Jenny or Ross told me, at the Sydney anniversary. Yeah, which is where Bert met Barbara. Yeah. I was actually due to come up on the 19th of May. I had my flight booked, but something happened to me and I had to cancel my flight that morning. And so then he passed away on the 6th of June. So for whatever reason, I suppose I wasn't meant to come up and spend time with him.
The date, the year of his passing, 6th of June.
2002. And also his stroke would have happened, it was around February. It would have been 1982. Yes, because I think it was 20 years since he had his stroke when he passed away.
No, you did really well.
Did I? Thank you.
Yeah.
It gets more comfortable as you go along.
Yeah.
Thank you.